Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for today's lesson on slope-intercept form. Um, we've been working on linear equations here in chapter 4, and we're going to work on slope-intercept form today, and it's probably my favorite way to graph linear equations because it's probably one of the quickest ways to do so. Let's check out a few examples and go through some of the steps that we need to learn here. For our key idea, the first little bit of vocabulary that we get is talking about the X-intercept and the Y-intercept. The book definition is the X-intercept of a line is the x-coordinate of the point where the line crosses the x-axis. It occurs when y is 0. Again, it occurs when y is 0 because we're not going up and down at all. Our y value is 0. And you can see that listed here. And really, it's a fancy way of saying it's where your line, here's our blue line, crosses the x-axis. Okay, it's where your line crosses the x-axis. That's what an intercept is. And it's the same with the y-intercept. The y-intercept of a line is the y-coordinate of the point where the line crosses the y-axis. It occurs when x is equal to 0. So if you're looking at this point, our x isn't to the right at all. It isn't a positive x. It isn't negative at all. It isn't a negative x. It's right on the y-axis. Our x is 0. Our b then, our y-intercept is right here. A lot of times they'll refer to the y-intercept as b. Okay, I'm just going to circle that because very commonly referred to as b, just to shorten it up, right? We're going to use that when we use slope-intercept form. Here's really the meat and potatoes of today. A linear equation written in the form y equals mx plus b. Here it is, people. This is what we're after today. Y equals mx plus b. This is slope-intercept form. What you're going to be able to do today is take this and make a line from it. This equation will make a line. Remember, we're dealing with linear equations. Linear equations make lines. So here's our formula that we're going to be using. The slope of the line is m, and the y-intercept is b. Okay, so the slope is m. This tells you your slope. Remember, the slope is your steepness of your line. And b, that is your y-intercept. That's where your line crosses the y-axis. And you only need to know these two things, the y-intercept and the slope, to be able to graph this equation and make a line. It's actually really quite handy, and I think you'll see that here. In the past when we've been graphing these, probably a lot of you had made t-charts. If x is 0, stick 0 into your equation and solve for y. So here's our ordered pair, 0, 1. All right, making t-charts and charts like this can kind of take a while, whereas the slope-intercept form is usually pretty quick and easy. All right, so for the first example, it says find the slope and the y-intercept of the graph in each linear equation. All right, so our slope is always the number in front of our x term. Okay, so in this case, the number in front of our x term is -4. So our slope is -4. And all it wants us to do is identify each one. Okay, and our y-intercept. Okay, the y-intercept is the number that's being added or subtracted to the end. So be careful here. These ones are tricky. Our y-intercept is -2. Okay, if Maybe you're saying, well, why is it negative? Remember, you could rewrite this equation here as this is the same thing as y equals negative 4x plus negative 2. All I did there was I changed my subtraction to addition and the next sign to its opposite, right? So remember those chop integer rules. You can apply them here. So now it's y equals mx plus b. So our b is negative, our y-intercept is negative 2. And that's it. That's all we have to do is we have to identify those. Okay. In letter B here, you'll see that our y isn't solved for. So that's going to be our first step, actually, is to solve for y. Because if you're looking at our slope-intercept formula, y equals mx plus b, our equation is solved for y. Here, we're not solved for y, but it's just a quick and simple step that we need to do. What is being done to y on the left-hand side of my equation? It's being subtracted by 5. So to undo that, you just add 5 to both sides. Negative 5 plus 5 would cancel, and we'd be left with y equals 3/2 x plus 5. And now we're in slope-intercept form. Now we can go to our second step of, okay, the number that's in front of x is 3/2, so my slope is 3/2. Remember, rise over run, up 3, right 2. And my y-intercept, the number that's being added to the end, is 5. So that this line would cross my y-axis at 5. Okay. All right, there you have it. Why don't you pause the video now to try 1 and 2 on your own. All right, we can do some abbreviating here. Is what I'll do. My slope, remember that's m is the kind of the shortcut method for slope. My slope, the number in front of my x is 3. And my y-intercept, abbreviation is b, would be -7. Let me know if you have questions on that. And then in this one, again, we need to solve for y in the first step. So y equals -2/3 x plus 1. My slope, the number in front of my x is -2/3. And my y-intercept, that's being added or subtracted to the end, is 1. Again, let me know if you have a question on that. Let's move on to the next example, where now we're going to graph for the first time. So it says graph y equals -3x plus 3 and identify the x-intercept. All right, so we're going to use slope and y-intercept to do so. So let's find those right away. My slope is -3. Remember, for slope, sometimes it's easier for some students to put it in a fraction form, and I like to do that too. -3 is the same thing as -3/1. So this is rise, this is run. Change in y, change in x. And then my y-intercept is the number that's being added to the end is 3. Okay. So now let's graph this. Right, I'm going to make my y-axis and make my x-axis. And the first thing I like to plot, the first thing I did was find my slope and my y-intercept. The next thing I like to do is I like to plot my y-intercept. And then lastly, what I do is use the slope to plot my next points. Okay, so Let's do that. Let's plot my y-intercept. My y-intercept is 3. So here's the y-axis, and it crosses it at 1, 2, 3. So there's my first point. All right, done this. Next, all I need to do is use my slope to plot my next points. So my slope is -3, 1. That means I go down 3, right 1 from this point. So down 1, 2, 3, right 1. Here's my point. I can do that again. Down 3, 1, 2, 3, right 1. It's still going to be on the same line. You could do the opposite of this. So you could take this negative and you could apply it in the denominator. So this would be +3, 1, 2, 3, and the 1 would now be negative, so we go to the left. As you can see, it's on this same line. All right. Usually, I tell students to have at least 3 points at a minimum, but sometimes 4 is a little bit more clear. So then you'll take your ruler if you have one. Ooh, it's extremely hard on my digital pen tablet, and make a straight line to connect those points. Excuse me, sorry about that. All right, moving on to example 3 in the real life application, and then we'll have a few OYOs for you to end up with. All right, so hang in there with me, we're almost finished. Example 3 says the cost Y in dollars of taking a taxi X miles is Y equals 2.5x plus 2. Here's our equation in slope-intercept form. Letter A wants us to graph the equation, and letter B wants us to interpret the y-intercept and the slope. Ooh, that reminds me, I don't think we finished this problem. Yeah, we didn't identify the X-intercept. Let's add number 4 here. To do that, remember, that's asking where does our line cross the x-axis? Well, I'm sorry, this isn't the neatest line here, but it would be right here, which is at the point 1, 0. Right 1, up and down 0. So it crosses the x-intercept. So in other words, the x-intercept is 1. Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot that last step there. I just was reminded when I saw these 2-step directions. All right, so graph this equation and then interpret the y-intercept and the slope. So when it says interpret, it means put the numbers in the real life situation. So talk about how the numbers relate to this taxi problem. All right, and maybe it will be a little bit more clear once we graph it. So I see I'm dealing with a couple positive numbers here. So I'm just going to use my first quadrant and see if that works out for me. If not, that's okay. I can always erase it. Okay, so here's my first quadrant. My numbers are pretty small, so I'm just going to go by ones and see how that goes for me. So my slope is the number in front of x, which is 2.5. And my y-intercept is the number all alone, the constant that's being added or subtracted to the end, so that's 2. And remember, that's where I like to start. So I'll start at 2 on my y-intercept, and then I'll use my slope from that point. So my slope is 2.5. Some of you might be saying, well, how can I use 2.5 as a slope? Well, remember, 2.5 is the same thing as 2.5, and then you can write that as an improper fraction if you want. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So this is the same as 5 halves. This might be a little bit easier for you to graph. So from this point, I'd go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and over 2. Don't erase. Oh, I knew it was gonna. Okay, so there is the point. Now, maybe you didn't know that, or you didn't do that, and you just said, okay, 2.5 is the same thing as 2.5 over 1. So I'm going to go up 1, 2.5, and go over 1. Well, notice you'd still be on the same line as we were. So either way really works to do that. Okay, so now just connect your points. We got a minimum of 3 here. Include my arrows and check I've done letter A. Letter B says, interpret the y-intercept and the slope. So we know our slope was 2.5, and we know our y-intercept was 2. What does that mean in the context of the problem? Okay. Well, if we're talking about our cost, y is dollars. So over here, we're talking about money. And our x, we're talking about miles. What does it mean if we go up 2.5 and over 1? Well, remember our x, our run, stands for miles, and this stands for money. So that means for every 1 mile you go, it's going to cost you $2.50. Okay, so for letter B, the cost is $2.50 per mile. That's what this means. It's $2.50 for each mile that you go. You go up $2.50 over 1. And then how about interpreting the y-intercept? What does it mean that we start at 2? Well, my x is 0. So what does that mean if I haven't gone any amount of miles yet, but I've already paid $2? Why is that? Well, that just means that the initial fee for taking the taxi is $2. So the y-intercept represents a $2 initial fee for, maybe you want to say, reserving the taxi or something along those lines. Okay, so as soon as you hop in, you're charged $2, and then it's $2.50 for each mile on top of that. Okay, so that is interpreting the slope and the y-intercept. All right, now for 3, 4, and 5, it says graph the linear equation, identify the x-intercept, use a graphing calculator to check more. So if you want to use a graphing calculator, don't be afraid to head over to Desmos to be able to check some of your answers. You can just type in these equations into Desmos and it will graph them for you. So don't be afraid to try that out so you can get used to working with that. So go ahead, pause here, graph it, identify x-intercept for 4, 3, 4, and 5 here. All right. Okay, so for, I'll do number 3 here. We got y equals x minus 4. This is a good one. Here's my y-intercept. Here's my x-intercept. And some of you might be saying, well, Mr. Rios, there's nothing in front of my x term, so what's my slope? Well, remember, if there's nothing there, we assume it's 1. There is just one x there. So my slope is going to be 1, and my y-intercept is forget about this negative 4. So I'd start off at negative 1, 2, 3, 4 on the y-axis, and my slope would be 1, which is the same as 1 over 1. So up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. Okay, and this would be my line of the equation y equals x minus 4. Number 4, then, I had y equals negative 1/2 x plus 1. Let's just make sure I wrote that down right. Yep. And, oh shoot, I already forgot. I didn't put down the X-Intercept. So this line crossed the X-Intercept at 1, 2, 3, 4. So the X-Intercept was 4. All right, let's graph this next one. Here's my y-axis and my x-axis. Start off at my y-intercept, which is 1, and my slope is negative 1/2. Down 1, right 2, down 1, right 2. Right, so that'd be the same as going up 1, left 2. Okay, so here's my line. And my x-intercept would be, crosses it at 2. All right, and there you have it for 3 and 4. For number 5, all we're really doing is we're changing the couple of numbers. So what does it mean that the y-intercept is 1.5? That means that when you get in the taxi, the initial cost is $1.50, and the slope 2 means that it's $2 per mile. Okay, so very similar to that real life example there. All right, again, slope-intercept form, I like it because it's quick and easy. You can just use an equation to graph a line. Let me know if you have more questions. That's all I have for today, and I will see you guys later.